People say the first winter behind the wheel is the one that teaches you how to listen. Not to music, not to talk radio, but to the truck itself. It hums different when the air turns white. Every bolt, every hose, every breath of diesel carries a kind of language, and if you pay attention, it tells you what's coming long before the weather does. That was the night I learned to hear that language. The night sky had fallen into a single color of gray. Snow drifted like ash through the beams of my headlights, and my whole world shrank to a few trembling meters ahead of the hood. The road was somewhere beneath the powder, and I was somewhere inside the kind of silence that only winter can build. It had been dark for hours, not the friendly dark of autumn, but the deep, endless kind that wraps the land until every sound folds inward. The wipers kept their rhythm. Thump, pause, thump. A heartbeat for a highway buried under snow. Inside the cab, my breath made faint ghosts on the side window. The heater let out a slow, steady sigh, blowing air that smelled faintly of rubber mats and the ghost of gasoline spilled during younger days. That smell always reminded me I was still moving, that the truck was alive. I eased my gloves tighter on the steering wheel. The leather was cold even through the fabric, slick from moisture brought in with the storm. Outside, the snow wasn't falling so much as floating, tilting endlessly sideways in a wind that had forgotten where it came from. The dash glowed in a quiet constellation of amber lights. Speed, temperature, oil pressure, all faint pulses in the darkness. Every gauge looked calm enough, but I could tell the engine was working harder than the numbers said. Deep under the floor, I could feel the vibration shifting, a faint tremor that old drivers talk about when they say, "She doesn't like the cold." I kept my ears open for the tone I trusted most, the low, even hum of the Detroit X Series engine pressing against the grate. When the air thickens with frost, that hum deepens into something close to human, a baritone breathing through metal lungs. Somewhere far off in the mirror lights, I caught faint glimmers from other rigs wrapped in the same storm. They looked like fireflies floating inside milk. We were all following the thread of the highway like pilgrims in the same quiet faith. The faith that the road would still be under our tires when morning came. I reached for the thermos beside my seat. The lid gave a small click, hiccuping in the cold. Coffee, lukewarm, metallic on the tongue, sweetened only by the steady crackle of snow hitting the windshield. That sound was comfort itself. Every few miles, a green highway sign would appear through the flurries, its letters frosted, unreadable until they were gone. It didn't matter, I knew the route by heart. Interstate 80 rolling west through Nebraska, flat miles where the landscape lulls you into forgetting direction altogether. The tires hissed softly, gripping patches of thawed asphalt hidden beneath drifts. That hiss, mixed with the steady clack of chains on the trailer wheels, built a rhythm that could put anyone to sleep, if they weren't the one steering. I turned the radio knob out of habit. Only static. Even the CB channels were sleeping tonight. No chatter, no laughter from drivers killing miles with stories. Just the hush of the world, wrapped too tightly in snow to bother speaking. Out there, the headlights carved their own small tunnel of warmth. The flakes shimmered through the beam like a million tiny sparks, each alive for a second before vanishing. That glow made me feel strangely safe, like I was towing a bubble of summer air through the heart of winter. For a while, the only sound was the hum of the truck and the slight crack of ice forming on the mirrors. Then, beneath it all, another melody joined in. The dull knock of frozen chunks breaking free from the undercarriage, falling back to the road in muted thuds. Little reminders of how heavy the weather had become. The cab smelled now of warm rubber, diesel, and brewed coffee. a scent that every driver on this continent would recognize in a blind room. It's what home smells like for us. Home on 16 wheels, carrying everything we own to somewhere we've never been. I thought about pulling into the next rest area, but something about the rhythm of it all felt too rare to disturb. Storms like this turn the highway into a kind of trance. You, the machine, and the snow humming one long, endless note. The heater growled softly as it cycled back on. Air moved over the vents, brushing my knees with dry warmth. My eyelids felt heavy, not with tiredness, but with calm. The mind starts to slow when surrounded by so much white. Snow makes its own silence. It eats the sound of distance and replaces it with presence. Every flake carries a weight of stillness, and inside that stillness you find strange peace. You stop thinking about how far or how fast. You just drive. And there, in the soft half-dark, the old Freightliner and I started to understand each other. Each flicker of the RPM needle, each subtle tremor through the floorboard, all of it translated into words I never learned to pronounce, but somehow knew how to feel. I whispered back under my breath, half to keep myself company, half to tell the truck I was listening. "We've got this," I said quietly. "Easy now, we've got this." The heater hissed like an answer. Outside, the wind changed its note. A little lower, a little meaner, but still distant. For now we were inside the eye of whatever winter had planned, carried forward by a machine that sounded like it believed me. The first sign of the cold sinking deeper came through the steering column. It wasn't a vibration this time, it was stiffness. Metal tightening on itself, the truck's frame shrinking a fraction at a time, answering the frost. Every movement started to echo. Even the pedal felt reluctant. Outside, the air looked thick enough to touch, glittering with suspended flakes that drifted sideways instead of falling. The thermometer on the dash blinked its orange numbers, dropping past -15 degrees Fahrenheit, then -18. The sight of it made my jaw tighten, even though I could already feel the truth of those digits in my fingertips. The steering wheel leather had cooled to stone. The heater fought to keep its breath warm. I rolled the window down an inch. Curiosity, insanity, habit, all the same out here. Cold came rushing in, clean and sharp, smelling of snow and diesel exhaust. That smell, half sweet, half bitter, reminded me of rest stops at dawn, of engines waking under a crust of frost. It stung my lungs, but it kept me awake. Ahead, the highway began to climb. Nothing dramatic on a summer night, but in this storm it looked like the side of a mountain. The sign read Summit Hill 4 miles, the letters half buried in ice. I downshifted early, hearing the gears catch with a muted groan. The sound told me everything. Traction thin, load heavy, patience necessary. Snow swirled harder now, flakes bursting through the beam of my headlights like sparks. Wherever the wind touched bare metal, frost bloomed instantly, spreading delicate veins across mirrors and door handles. The hum of the engine deepened into a low growl. I could feel it in my chest as much as hear it, a slow vibration rising up through the pedals into bone. The truck was asking for partnership, steady feet, no sudden moves, trust in its grip. Halfway up the grade, the visibility fell to almost nothing. The world beyond the hood turned to a sheet of white light. Only the amber glow from the marker lamps traced the edge of the trailer ahead of me. Every flake caught that glow for a heartbeat before vanishing. It was hypnotic, too hypnotic. That's the danger people never mention. When snow fills your senses, it starts to close time around you. Minutes stretch, seconds drift. The mind drifts with them. The back tires slipped once, twice. A deep thud echoed up through the frame, the chains biting back into ice. The whole rig lurched sideways a foot and then found itself again. My hands tightened instinctively. Not fear, focus. Fear wastes attention, and attention is everything out here. The heater rattled as it changed speed, blowing heat that smelled faintly of antifreeze and warm dust. That scent, burnt dust on metal, was the smell of survival. It meant the core was still hot enough to push back against the storm. I leaned forward in the seat, eyes scanning for movement at the periphery. Fence posts half buried in snow, a reflector flashing once and gone. Small proofs that the road still existed beneath us. The climb steepened. I dropped another gear, let the RPM rise to where the engine sounded most comfortable, a rumbling purr between effort and ease. Snow droned under the tires like crushed shells, a deep scraping rhythm that filled every gap of silence. It was strange how alive everything felt despite the cold. Frost covered the world, but warmth pulsed inside the cab, inside me. The smell of hot oil, the shiver of metal, the taste of stale coffee, all reminders that life keeps its fire even when the air outside burns with ice. I thought briefly of the stories older drivers told in diners back east, nights when they'd chained up on mountain passes, fighting whiteouts alone, the radio nothing but static, the only voice their own steady breathing. They always said the same thing at the end. You don't beat winter, you let it test you, and you finish the conversation. Maybe that was what was happening now. A conversation, not a battle, not defiance, just two forces learning each other's boundaries. I felt the trailer begin to fishtail slightly, caught it with a counter touch, then another slip, shorter, and then finally steady again. The windshield looked like a frozen river, wipers carving twin channels through the frost. Outside the glass, the storm danced in the light like a sea of tiny ghosts trying to tell their story too fast. Temperature gauge still dropping, heater blowing steady, defroster humming in low harmony. Every piece of the machine sang in its own register, and somehow together they formed something almost musical, a hymn for the traveler, played in diesel and wind. Another mile, maybe two. The grade leveled slightly, the RPM eased, and the tires found the whisper of dry pavement beneath the snowpack. The steering relaxed under my palms. Ahead, through the glass veiled in frost, I caught a faint break in the storm, a glimpse of sky turning gray with the promise of dawn. For a moment, I let myself smile. Not triumph, not relief, just quiet respect. The truck had done what it always does, kept moving, inch by inch, heartbeat by heartbeat, until stillness gave way. I patted the dash, feeling the mild vibration of the engine through my glove. Good work, I whispered. We're learning each other. Snow still whipped around us, but it felt different now, less like an enemy, more like company. A reminder that even the hardest weather has beauty if you drive slow enough to see it. And behind that thought came another, slower one. There would be more nights like this. More climbs, more cold, more endless white. But after tonight, I'd never again be the kind of driver who feared his first winter. I reached for the thermos again, still warm. The lid hissed as I unscrewed it, releasing the steam that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and hope. I laughed quietly into my collar. Out here, that's as close as anyone gets to morning prayer. The climb behind me became a pale memory of effort, a white blur in the mirrors. The road ahead stretched straight again, rolling through frozen plains that looked endless even in daylight. The storm had eased, but its breath still moved across the fields, lifting dry drifts that skated over the highway like ghosts of wind. I didn't mind them. They danced low and silent, and their motion somehow softened the loneliness. Sunlight hid behind a gray veil, diffused into something milky and kind. The world was no longer trying to stop me. It was simply reminding me how small I was compared to its quiet persistence. Snow hummed beneath the tires in a steady, velvety rhythm. Every sound that had once been sharp, the whistle in the seals, the rattle of chains, now blended into the texture of that hum. It was the song of progress, slow but undefeated. The heater blew dry air across the cab, rattling the maps folded above the visor. My gloves sat on the dash to dry, stiff with frost around the knuckles. Steam rose from them in lazy curls each time the defroster fan turned toward the windshield. I could taste the metal of the air, the faint tang of diesel that forever clung to the fabric of my jacket. It mixed with the smell of road salt and engine heat, the scent every long-haul driver wears like second skin. To anyone else it'd be harsh, but to me it was comfort, proof that the world still turned. That machine still translated human will into motion. A crackle came through the CB at last. Static first, then a rough voice, anonymous. "Westbound driver, you still in that blowout near mile 402?" I picked up the mic automatically. "Copy. Clearing now, but ice is still slick on the climb." The voice chuckled like gravel rolling in a drum. "Ain't it always? Keep it shiny side up." Then gone. The warmth that flooded me wasn't from the heater. After hours of silence, even a few words through static give you back your place in a tribe. The unseen brotherhood scattered across thousands of miles of cold highway. I passed him 20 minutes later, a blue Peterbilt half buried in snow at a turnout, chains glinting under a sky the color of pewter. The driver was digging out with a shovel, steam pouring from his breath. I flashed my lights once. He lifted a gloved hand in salute. That gesture, silent, brief, unneeded, meant more than entire conversations back in cities. Wind gusts slapped loose snow across the hood, powdering the glass. Then the silence folded again, thick and calm. The only motion left was the slow turning of the drive shafts beneath, singing their low, unending hymn of labor. Hours slipped past like that. The light never quite changed, dawn shading into day, day refusing to brighten. Somewhere along the line the snow began again, slower but thicker, heavy flakes twisting downward through the air like shredded feathers. I pulled into a way station lot already abandoned for the season. Only a pair of tracks cut through the drifts. The stillness there felt vast, almost hollow. When I opened the door, the cold hit me square, quick and clean. It bit through denim, pressed its fingers into my ribs. The air didn't smell of anything at all until the diesel exhaust curled back under the frame. Then suddenly it smelled of life again. That dark, burnt sweetness curled toward the sky, visible for 50 feet before the storm dissolved it. I walked around the truck, one gloved hand trailing along the side of the trailer. The aluminum skin was rough with ice crystals that snapped under my touch. Chains on the back axle had frozen so stiff they made no sound when struck. I knelt, pried one loose, and the link's metallic ring felt cold enough to already belong to another world. Fingers stiff, breath shallow. I checked each tire, each coupling. Everything solid. Everything still trusted me enough to keep moving. By the time I climbed back into the cab, the inside fogged with my breath and the scent of cold leather. I realized the heater alone couldn't thaw what the wind had touched. So I did what every driver does. Pulled my shoulders into the wool blanket behind the seat. Let the residual warmth from the engine seep through the floorboards. And waited until my hands remembered what warmth felt like. That pause, sitting alone in the cab while snow swept sideways across the windshield, was maybe the most peaceful moment of the whole journey. The world had gone white, featureless, as if stripped down to the essentials: breath, hum, heartbeat. You could almost believe nothing else existed, and that absence of everything became its own kind of prayer. When I started rolling again, dusk had already crept back over the land, though the clock swore it was just afternoon. The whole day had lived inside a cloud. Headlights came on by instinct. Their glow spread through the flurries like lanterns underwater. I thought about the city I'd left 2 days earlier. Wet streets, the hiss of tires on slush, people walking fast under neon signs. How different it all felt now. Silence instead of traffic. The steady patience of an engine instead of voices and clocks. It struck me that winter at its worst can be gentler than people at their best. Snow doesn't ask anything of you but patience. Another rig fell in line behind me, far enough back to vanish between gusts, close enough that his headlights painted twin halos in my mirrors. For 50 miles we never spoke, never passed. Just two living streaks of amber pulling each other through endless gray. Sometimes companionship doesn't require words. When we finally reached an open stretch, the other driver blinked his lights twice, a thank you or goodbye, and drifted ahead until he was just a bloom of red taillight dissolving into flurries. The wind began to rise again, sharper now, slicing tendrils of snow across the roadway that looked almost alive. Each gust hit the trailer like a slow wave, tilting the weight before settling it back. The truck creaked softly in response, metal stretching against cold. I could feel those creaks through my feet, tiny heartbeats of the machine, each one saying still here, still strong. It grew colder by the mile. Frost formed on the inside corners of the windshield where the defroster couldn't reach. The steering wheel squeaked faintly under gloves hardened by dried moisture. Even the radio knobs had cooled to biting metal. I turned the volume up again, more for company than hope. To my surprise, a thin thread of music wove through, some AM station still surviving the storm, crooning an old country tune about home and quiet roads. The sound fuzzed in and out, but for a few miles it was enough to carry me forward on melody alone. That's one of the strange mercies of the road. Even static can sound like a song if you drive long enough. Night came for the second time since the start of the storm. The temperature gauge hovered below minus 25 degrees Fahrenheit. Even the air felt solid. But somewhere in that long stretch of darkness, I began to sense an odd calm building inside me. The fear of cold, of slipping tires, of solitude, all had worn down. What replaced it was gratitude. Because the road, for all its danger, had begun to trust me. And I, finally, had learned to trust it back. The landscape outside remained a wash of white streaked with faint blue shadows. Every fence post glittered with the same frost. Every field shimmered under the moon. The engine's vibration became a kind of heartbeat against my chest. Steady, grounding, endlessly present. I realized then that the hardest part of winter driving wasn't the ice or the wind. It was convincing yourself to slow down enough for its beauty to sink in. Once you surrender that fight, it becomes easy. Every drifting flake, every sigh from the heater, every new mile, all of it becomes a lullaby. And that lullaby carried me onward, deeper into the long winter night, toward a kind of understanding that didn't need words. By the time I reached the edge of the plateau, the wind had dropped enough that the flakes no longer hurled themselves sideways. They drifted straight down, thick and soft as ash. The road widened here, gave the truck a chance to breathe. I could almost hear it sigh, a long mechanical exhale, the hum easing from strain into contentment. Morning, somewhere far behind the cloud banks, was pushing faint silver into the gray. Not sunrise, exactly. More like the promise of one. Light that didn't yet belong to the day, but was tired of the dark. Snow covered everything with the same hushed dignity. Fences, mileposts, the tops of silos long abandoned. Even the sky seemed padded with it. The landscape had no edges left, only soft folds of white rolling under the wheels like memory. I kept my hand pressed lightly to the wheel, feeling it hum under my palm. Each vibration tuned to a note I could almost predict now. The heater whispered warm air across my knees. The defroster breathed a faint halo around the glass. The smell of warm oil filled the cabin, rich, clean, and comforting. The scent of a machine happy with its work. For a few long miles I rode through that silence with nothing to fix or fear. The world outside had settled. The storm had given everything it had to give, and now simply watched me drive. That was when realization landed. Quiet, simple. Winter wasn't the enemy I'd thought it was. It was another teacher, just slower to speak, older in its language. A narrow bridge appeared ahead. 2 lanes, snow-packed, iron rails crusted with frost. I downshifted without thought. Let the truck glide over it as gently as possible. Below, a half-frozen creek muttered beneath sheets of ice. The sound was tiny, but it carried through the metal like a heartbeat. When we rolled clear of the bridge, the road curved toward the west, and in that gentle bend, the clouds began to thin. Light broke through, not a burst or blaze, but a slow unfurling, like someone pulling back the curtain of dawn 1 inch at a time. It touched the snow first, painting it in pale rose. Then it climbed the side of the trailer, spilling warmth across the chrome mirrors until they flared with brief sunrise fire. I throttled back a little, just to watch it happen, just to be the one still driving when the new day found me. All that weight of night, the climb, the fear, the cold that crept through every seam, suddenly seemed worth it. This light had to be earned. The radio, silent for hours, cracked softly. A single note, uncertain, and then a voice, an old song from nowhere. One of those forgotten truck stop ballads that sound the same no matter who sings them. It played in and out between bursts of static, but the melody needed no perfection. It was enough. I turned the volume down to let it ride under the rumble of the engine. Together, those 2 sounds, music and machine, made the best company a driver could ask for. By the time the sun finally cleared the ridge, I'd been awake nearly 20 hours. Not tired, just finished. The kind of stillness that only comes when every part of you has done its job. The next sign promised a rest area ahead, hidden somewhere in the blur of white pines that bordered the highway. I eased off the accelerator, feeling the trailer's gentle weight slow behind me. No rush, no resistance, just glide. A blue lamp at the entrance glowed dim through drifting snow. The lot beyond it looked almost untouched, snow-packed and gleaming. I rolled in slow, let the tires crunch a path of black arcs into the drifts. Another truck sat parked far across the lot, engine idling low. A single orange cord of light running along its side like the ember of a sleeping giant. The rest of the world had gone perfectly quiet. I pulled alongside the outer edge, near a stand of pines bending under their own weight of frost. When I set the brake, the cab tilted forward slightly, then rested. The engine settled into idle. The vibrations eased, faded. For a few breaths, I just listened to the way sound unraveled. Diesel thrum collapsing into clicks, clicks into silence, silence into peace. I reached forward and cut the switch. The lights died one by one, and in their absence, the world filled with dim blue winter glow. The last warmth from the vents drifted across my face, smelling faintly of every mile we'd conquered: oil, rubber, dust, and something sweet I could never name. Outside, flakes still fell, but gently now, drifting straight down, catching the pale sunlight like dust in water. I watched them settle on the mirror, tiny stars melting into drops that slid down the glass. Inside, every edge softened. The steering wheel no longer felt necessary. It could rest as I did. I unzipped my jacket, pulled the blanket from behind the seat, and leaned back until the headrest caught me. The hum of the cooling engine vibrated faintly through the floorboards, a slow heartbeat too peaceful to disturb. Even that diesel scent, once sharp, had become warm and heavy and safe. Mixed with frost, it smelled like sleep itself. Eyes half closed, I stared through the windshield at nothing particular. Just pale light shifting through the falling snow. Just the outlines of tall pines swaying. Just the trail we'd left winking faint copper under the sunrise. The mind began to drift, the way the truck had drifted earlier on the grade. Slowly, gently, with a kind of surrender. Thoughts that had been loud all night thinned into whispers. The road behind me, the mountain climbs, the voice on the radio, the soft lesson that winter had come not to frighten, but to teach. Outside, a bird called once, faint, small, lost among waves of snow. The answer came from somewhere deep inside the trees. Even that seemed unnecessary. Some sounds exist only so silence can feel complete afterward. My breathing matched the rhythm of the truck's metal cooling. Each breath shorter, deeper, calmer. And then, somewhere between one blink and the next, I felt the world tip forward, not falling, just resting, like the moment a wave folds back into the sea. In that fold, everything was warm, everything was whole. The storm still whispered against the glass, but its voice had softened to a lullaby. The heater clicked once more and fell quiet. Snowlight filled the cabin. I let it. Sleep came easy, a slow drift into white, and just before the last thought faded, I remembered what old drivers said about their first true winter night. You never really conquer the cold. You just learn to meet it halfway, and let it carry you the rest of the way home. That's where my story ends tonight. If you'd like to hear more from the road, hit subscribe and rest easy, my friend.